What is that antidote? Well, as C.S. Lewis says this, that if I find in myself desires which nothing in this world can satisfy, the only logical explanation is that I was made for another world.
I'm still walking. Still walking on.
Hey everyone, today I want to talk to you about the problem of disenchantment, what it is, and how it is that we can help to kind of escape the spell of disenchantment with the help of C.S. Lewis and Tolkien. And so I hope to excite you about Tolkien and Lewis, but more particularly, I hope to excite you about what they were excited about. And I hope that in doing so, you'll begin to experience life as enchanted again. So what do I mean by disenchanted? Why is this a problem? Well, I think probably the best description of disenchantment I've ever heard is from C.S. Lewis himself. And he describes life prior to his conversion to Christianity. And he says this, that nearly all I loved, I believed to be imaginary. And nearly all that I believed to be real, I thought grim and meaningless. Now that is as good a description as the experience of disenchantment as I would ever hope to find. Nearly all that I loved, I believed to be imaginary. And nearly all that I believed to be real, I thought grim and meaningless. Everything you hope to be true, you think isn't true. Everything you so deeply desire in your heart, you believe that's all fiction. But everything that's grim and mundane and meaningless and without purpose, those are the things that you think, that's what you think of when you think of reality. And this is seeping into us at such a deep level that it even influences children. So when I take my kids to see a good movie or introduce them to a good series of books like Harry Potter novels or something like that, I can almost bank on one of their reactions when they finished that to be, I wish when they come out of that story and they have to enter into reality again, there's that kind of hole within them and they want to fill the void as soon as possible. And they express that longing. I wish our world was like that world. I wish it was as exciting and as meaningful as that world. And again, they're just expressing what C.S. Lewis articulated so much more clearly in his adulthood. And nearly all he believed to be imaginary, all he loved, he believed to be imaginary, and nearly all that he believed to be real, he thought grim and meaningless. And this is shaping the way that we view all of reality, all of the cosmos. And that's really what this podcast is about. It's going to be exploring what is real, what is reality, to know what, to try and understand what our world really is and why it's significant, why it's exciting to us. So one of the great other moments in C.S. Lewis is the way that he describes disenchantment within the story. So there's this great moment where Eustace in Voyage of the Dawn Treader, I think, he encounters the star, and then he comments, and the star is kind of like this old guy that they get talking to, and then he comments and he says, "In our world," says Eustace, "a star is a huge ball of flaming gas." Now, that is, when I say to most people, what is a star? That is how they would answer. They would say that a star is a huge ball of flaming gas. That is all it is. Now, we might not know it, but that is, in fact, a disenchanted view of a star. So C.S. Lewis goes on in the story and he says, "Even in your world, my son, that is not what a star is, but only what it is made of." So in our world, says Eustace, a star is a huge ball of flaming gas. But through the narrative, C.S. Lewis's reply to that comment is that even in your world, even in this world, the real world, not in the fictional world of Narnia, but in this real world, that isn't what a star is. So the question is, that's only what a star is made of. So the question is, why do we only think of the being of something, its ontology, in terms of what it's made of? And what that is the process of disenchantment. Through modernism, our mind is shifted from thinking about what things are simply to thinking about what they're made of and how they work. And so we have become almost entirely saturated with a kind of very particular mindset, which is the empirical mindset. We want to study things. We want to understand how they work and what they're made of. And this is an absolutely necessary thing to do. But if that's the only tool we have in the toolbox, if that's the only lens through which we see the world, then very, very quickly we start to feel this feeling of disenchantment. So again, in the Chronicles of Narnia, there's this great moment where Puddleglum kind of saves the kids from the witch's spell. And disenchantment is a kind of a spell that modernism and the modern world has put on all of us. So suppose, he says, we have only dreamed or made up of all those things. They're stuck in a cave somewhere, and they have these kind of vague memories of the outside world, the real world, Narnia. But the witch is, of course, trying to persuade them that all of this is just a dream. It's all just made up. It isn't real. Very much like the kinds of things that the modern secularist or materialist would try and say today. That when we speak about things spiritual, things unseen, these are just dreams or things made up. It's just wishful thinking. So again, in narrative form, C.S. Lewis comments on this in the Chronicles of Narnia, and he says, suppose, says Puddleglum, we've only dreamed or made up all those things, trees and grass and sun and moon and stars and Aslan himself. Suppose we have. And all I can say is, in that case, the made-up things seem a good deal more important than the real ones. Suppose this black pit of a kingdom of yours is the only world. Well, it strikes me as a pretty poor one. And that's a funny thing when you come to think of it. We're just babies making up a game, if you're right. But four babies playing a game can make a play world which licks your real world hollow. And that's why I'm going to stand by the play world. I'm on Aslan's side, even if there isn't any Aslan to lead it. I'm going to live as like a Narnian as I can, even if there isn't any Narnia. So thanking you kindly for our supper. If these two gentlemen and the young lady are ready, we're leaving your court at once and setting out in the dark to spend our lives looking for overland. Not that our lives will be very long, I should think, but that's a small loss if the world's as dull a place as you say. Now, the reason this is so important is because Puddleglum is pointing out that they're in this underground cave and they have these ideas. They think of Narnia. They think of Aslan, who's the Lord of Narnia, the great lion of Narnia, the kind of Jesus figure in the world. And they think of the kind of the trees and the sun and the whole overland, the grass, the beauty of Narnia. And they are thinking all this within the confines of their kind of underground cave. It's very reminiscent of Plato's cave, if you know that idea. And then he says, listen, even if we're wrong, I'm still going to pick that world over this world that you have created for us. Now, what he's not saying there is that, listen, it's better to live in a fantasy like Christianity, and even if it's not true, you'll be better off. I mean, in one sense, that is kind of true. Even if it's not true, you'll be better off. It beats the heck out of any other worldview. But that isn't what he's saying. What he's saying is that how could it not be true if everybody in the world is able to imagine and think about it? If you're able to imagine a world so much better than the real one, then isn't that an argument against the fact that this world is all that there is? Because if this is all there is, why are we constantly drawn to dream and imagine, and even in one sense remember a world beyond this world? So, like Puddleglum, I think what we need to do is recognize the enchantment of what's going on. Something in our world is not quite right. We're being told that all we are kind of is matter and material stuff, and that nothing really has any ultimate sense of meaning. It only has the meaning that you give it. Meaning is just subjective and it's imposed. It's not objective. It's not discovered. It's not real. It's not there. You can just kind of create an artistic meaning for yourself. But rather here, the kind of what C.S. Lewis is saying is that the mere fact that we have this artistic ability to imagine worlds beyond our own lets you know that for this world to exist simply as it is a ridiculous notion. Why would children be able to imagine a far greater world and yearn for a far greater world if such a world was never possible? Why would we have the imaginative ability to exceed the reality and nature of our world? Surely what we're doing is presenting poor imitations of reality. In the same way that try as he may, an artist might try to capture a beautiful sunset or a landscape scene, he will never quite master it. So if we're able to artistically and imaginatively create these worlds far greater than our own, then there's two possibilities. One is we're better than anything that currently exists, or we're only seeing a part of it. And this is what C.S. Lewis is saying, that rather than live in a world, and this is why things seem so disenchanted. You might say, but I do have meaning. I do believe in meaning. And even for Christians, this is a thing, right? So even for Christians, when we say, But we do believe in meaning. So often we're still doing what the kind of modernist wants you to do, which is to kind of put your own meaning on things rather than discover the meaning that is actually in there. Your thinking of meaning is subjective and imposed rather than objective and discovered. In other words, disenchantment is like an actual spell. It's an actual mind trick that gets you to think of reality in a way that is not real, and to be so persuaded by the delusion of disenchantment that you would then look at depictions of actual reality and dismiss them and choose instead the bleak version of our delusion rather than the wonderful reality that is there to be discovered. Now, in the Bible, this actually goes further, right? It goes further. It's not even just a kind of a deception caused by clever arguments. It is actually supernatural in and of itself. So it is an actual blindness that is imposed by supernatural forces through deception, through arguments, through worldviews, but it is also through supernatural evil forces. And so, is this true though? You might think, okay, what is the actual evidence? What is the actual evidence for disenchantment? Well, I mean, the statistics of the Western world, which has at the same time never been more materialist, never been more secular, never been more subjective, never been more individualistic, and never has a society existed that has drank the modernist Kool-Aid like the modern West, the US, the UK, Western Europe. And never have these places been more depressed and anxious. The statistics are crazy. I won't go into them here. You can look them up for yourself. We've never been more materialist, we've never been more secular, and we've never been more depressed. This, to me, is the evidence of disenchantment. But you might be watching this and you might be looking at it from a Christian point of view and thinking, well, that's not me. Well, certainly being a Christian is going to mitigate against the influence of the world. But this is the air we breathe in the United Kingdom, in the United States, and other kind of Western places like Australia and New Zealand and all across kind of the West generically. This is the kind of air that we breathe. It's no surprise that we too will be kind of infected with it and affected by it. And so we need to kind of take the antidote from time to time. And so what is that antidote? Well, as C.S. Lewis says this, that if I find in myself desires which nothing in this world can satisfy, the only logical explanation is that I was made for another world. The sea. Alas, I have not yet beheld it, writes Tolkien. But deep in the hearts of all my kindred lies the sea longing, which it is perilous to stir. Alas, for the gulls, no peace shall I have again under beech or under elm. And that's Legolas in The Return of the King. Again, describing this deep yearning that's awakened in him for the sea, this kind of sea longing that once it kind of awakes in you, you can't stop it. Everything is telling you to pursue the greater reality. And this is what C.S. Lewis and Tolkien were hinting at throughout there. And to a large extent, it's the reason why they wrote what they wrote. They were trying to evoke in us that kind of longing. So for Lewis and for Tolkien, the antidote, the key part of the antidote was reactivating our imagination through myth. So the remedy is not to enchant a disenchanted world, but it's more to disenchant. It's kind of like an unveiling rather than an enchantment. It's a breaking of the spell of disenchantment rather than trying to see something that isn't really there. You're not trying to add an enchantment to a disenchanted world. You're trying to break the spell that sees an enchanted world as disenchanted. And so very important for Tolkien and Lewis, and for us, I think, is the role of our imagination. So imagination is not just make-believe. It is about understanding meaning. The great poet Malcolm Guite said, imagination is building a bridge between apprehension and comprehension. All great art is a bridge with one foot in the world of comprehension, the visible, the earth, and one in the realm of apprehension, the invisible, heaven. So imagination is building a bridge between apprehension and comprehension, and, just seeing something and then beginning to understand its meaning. And so all great art is an attempt to build a bridge between what you see and what you see means. In other words, it is helping you to understand and to perceive meaning. It's not adding meaning or inventing meaning. It's perceiving the meaning that is there. As we do this, how then do we do that? How do we activate our imagination? Well, we've already hinted that it's through the art. For C.S. Lewis and for Tolkien, it was hugely to do with myth. Now, myth, when we think of myth, myth is a kind of another form of make-believe, right? This is another kind of modernist distortion of reality. Myth is not make-believe. It's not made up. It's not fiction, which is the way that we so often think about myth. Myth is a highly symbolic form of story through which realities are communicated to us, right? So it is a true story communicated in highly symbolic form through which realities are communicated to us. They bridge the gap between the experience of reality and the truth about reality. So you might experience the world, but do you understand what your experience means? Are you understanding correctly what your experience means? And very often myth would basically take truth and embody it. So it would take the form of characters or monsters or scenes or worlds, and truths would become embodied and experienced in story. In one sense, all stories do this, but myth is a particularly powerful tool in order to help achieve this. It's not sort of just telling you in propositional form. It's not just making statements of fact. It is helping you to understand by kind of embodying the truth within a symbolic story. So through myth, we can kind of step outside, and this was one of Tolkien's favorite ways of describing it. That myth basically allows you, if you imagine you're trying to look out your window and you're trying to see this beautiful scene with the sky and the rolling hills and the trees and everything, but the problem with your window is that it's really, really dirty on the outside, and so you can't see that scene properly. You can't quite perceive reality out the window. And so what myth can do, and what Tolkien found that it did, and what Lewis found that it did, was that it allowed you to step outside the window and to clean your window pane so that you could now see reality more clearly. So, for example, in Tolkien and in Lord of the Rings, you would often encounter orcs, and then someone will say, well, this is just a silly story because orcs don't exist, right? Well, in one sense, orcs as they're imagined in Tolkien's world probably don't exist. But what is an orc? Okay, if Lord of the Rings is a myth, and which I think it's fair to say it is, if Lord of the Rings was created to become a myth, then what is the symbolic embodiment of truth in an orc? Well, to answer that, an orc is someone who is something beautiful and good and fair that becomes twisted and distorted by evil to become something ugly and something evil. So where in our world, you might say, do orcs exist? And you can argue yes or no. I mean, no, in that sense. But does there exist things that were once beautiful and are now twisted and corrupted by the influence of evil to become dangerous and ugly? And the answer to that is, of course, yes. Of course those things exist. They exist in every single sphere of life. So in that sense, orcs do exist, in that mythical sense. And that is precisely the value of myth. It's taking the concept of something beautiful, distorted into something evil, and something ugly through the influence of evil, and it's embodying it in this thing called an orc. Now, with clean windows, we're now ready to see the true myth. Right? So we're now ready, through the orc, we're now ready to have cleaned a little bit of window to see in our world the reality that is trying to be communicated through that, which is that beautiful, good, eternal things can become twisted to become ugly things. And so we're now ready to see the true myth. And of course, the great aim of Tolkien and Lewis was not simply to get us to understand individual concepts, but rather a world where we could see the good news and be prepared to see and have the window panes cleaned enough for us to be able to see the good news about Jesus Christ, the Son of God, who is Savior and King and the only hope of this world and the only hope of his kingdom. So I love again this quote from Malcolm Guite where he says, the healing of that split between reason and imagination is found in the incarnation, death, and resurrection of Jesus Christ. He comes not only to save us from our sins, but also to heal the tragic figure in our ways of knowing. The healing of that split between reason and imagination is found in the incarnation, death, and resurrection of Jesus Christ. He comes not only to save us from our sins, but also to heal the tragic fracture in our ways of knowing. So Jesus Christ is not only what disenchantment is obscuring from us, he's also the solution, the antidote to disenchantment. He is what makes our world so wonderfully enchanted and what we so often miss about our reality when we think it's boring or mundane. Now, let me give you some examples from Tolkien and Lewis about how they did this, because I think in one sense it'd be great. It's one thing to talk about the abstract concept, but let's talk a little bit about how they actually did this in their stories. So how through myth they were helping us to clean the window pane so that we could understand the true reality. So they spoke about creation, for example. In the darkness, something was happening at last, writes Tolkien. A voice had begun to sing. It was very far away, and Diggory found it hard to decide from which direction it was coming. Sometimes it seemed to come from all directions at once. Sometimes he almost thought it was coming out of the earth beneath them. Its lower notes were deep enough to be the voice of the earth herself. There were no words. There was hardly even a tune, but it was, beyond comparison, the most beautiful noise he had ever heard. One moment there had been nothing but darkness. The next moment 1,000 points of light leapt out, single stars, constellations and planets, brighter and bigger than any in our world. And if you had seen and heard it, as Diggory did, you would have felt quite certain it was the stars themselves which were singing, and that it was the first voice, the deep one, which had made them to appear and made them sing. Now, this description of creation is very, very biblical. Not only in the sense that you have a voice that brings all things into being. God said, let there be light, and there was light, and God said that it was good. But also the references to stars singing at the dawn of creation in Job 38, for example. Tolkien writes, then Iluvatar said to them, of the theme that I have declared to you, I will now that ye make in harmony together a great music. But I will sit and hearken and be glad that through you a great beauty has been wakened into song. Therefore I say, let these things be. And I will send forth into the void the flame imperishable. And it shall be at the heart of the world, and the world shall be. And those of you that will that will may go down into it. And suddenly the Ainur saw afar off a light, as it were a cloud with a living heart of flame. And they knew that this was no vision only, but that Iluvatar had made a new thing, Ea, the world that is. And in this music, the world was begun. For Iluvatar made visible the song of the Ainur, and they beheld it as a light in the great darkness. Now, this is, again, Tolkien weaving together so many of these themes: the song of creation, the voice of creation, the kind of role of the divine council and God in the work of creation, the kind of bringing together the angels and singing over creation again in Genesis 1 and in John 1, that all of this kind of this world is being brought to bear through voice, through word, through Jesus Christ himself. And all of creation is being brought to bear around in joy and the song of the angels. Now compare this to the kind of secular materialist view that it is all just an accident. And we all just crawled out of the accidental primordial soup quite by accident. Here you have a deliberate, beautiful creation of something with honor and dignity and worth and meaning and purpose. You see this in many other ways. Too. You see this, for example, in the fall. So again, compared to a kind of secular materialist view where suffering is kind of just the way it is. That's just the reality of life. There's no getting away from it, and you just have to kind of learn to deal with it. And maybe through scientific advancements we can get rid of some of it, but the reality is we're all going to die and we're all going to suffer before we die. And so just try and enjoy it as much as you can. And if you can't enjoy it, well, that sucks for you. You know, that's pretty much the secular materialist worldview. If you're going to be consistent with it, at least. I mean, nobody actually lives like that because you can't, but that would be consistent with it. Compared to that, here's Tolkien on the fall and corruption of Melkor. From splendor he fell, through arrogance, to contempt for all things save himself, a spirit wasteful and pitiless. He began with a desire of light, but when he could not possess it for himself alone, he descended through fire and wrath into a great burning, down into darkness. The evil of Melkor and the blight of his hatred flowed out thence, and the spring of ardor was marred. Green things fell sick and rotted, and the shape of Ardor and the symmetry of its waters and its lands was marred in that time, so that the first designs of the Valar were never after restored. So here you have a very different version of why suffering exists in the world. It is through cosmic causes that suffering exists. It is through the beginning of evil and through this kind of Satan figure who is the root and cause of all evil, that there has become a blight in the world, that actually things are being corrupted by the sin and by the evil that comes from this cosmic figure. That actually part of the reason why we are suffering is not only due to our kind of own sin or fault or weakness, but especially and most truly due to the kind of influence of evil in the world, the influence of Satan and demons and spiritual forces of darkness, that sin is like a sickness, that we are caught up in this kind of cosmic war. And there is therefore meaning behind suffering, and a meaning that should be pointing us to where we might be made well and where hope and healing could come from. And again, this reflects the true myth. So in the same way that creation in Lord of the Rings and in Narnia is reflecting the true myth of Genesis 1 and John 1 and Job 38. Here, the kind of true myth of Isaiah 14 and the fall of Satan and the corruption of creation in Genesis 3. These things are being reflected. So as the window is being cleaned by the fictional myth, we are then able to see out into the true myth, the true reality of why there is evil and suffering in our world. And so rather than just accepting it, we ought to be crying out to God for redemption, which is where Tolkien and Lewis go next. So, redemption. So again, compared to the kind of the humanist or secular materialist view, where you just kind of have to save yourself through politics or through human engineering, or kind of hopefully through education. There's basically the view that no one is coming to save us. We have to kind of fix ourselves. And even though we've gone from bad to worse in almost every sphere of human life, especially in those areas where we have rejected the kind of view that only God can save us, and we've turned to our own inventions and own devices to save ourselves, especially in these areas, we have become more depressed and more anxious than ever before. Never before has it seemed to us like there is no help coming. But in Tolkien, we have our windows cleaned, and we are invited to see through his myth, the true myth. So he writes, "From the ashes, a fire shall be woken. A light from the shadows shall spring. Renewed shall be blade that was broken. The crownless again shall be king." That's obviously Strider's poem, pointing to the return of the king and the renewal of his line and the hope of mankind. So there will come a king who will save us. If the witch, this is in Narnia, of course. If the witch knew the true meaning of sacrifice, she might have interpreted the deep magic differently. That when a willing victim who has committed no treachery is killed in a traitor's stead, the stone table will crack and even death itself will turn backwards. Right? So Tolkien and Lewis, the return of a king who will also, through no treachery of his own, though he's committed no treachery, done nothing wrong, will die in the place of others who have done wrong. And that will be the hope of salvation. And this is, of course, reflecting the true myth of Christianity. For God so loved the world that he gave his one and only Son, that whoever believes in him will not perish, but will have everlasting life. Mark 10:45, which says that the Son of Man came not to be served, but to serve, and to give his life as a ransom for many. Jesus is that promised king, but he is coming to lay his life down as a ransom. And of course, this was Tolkien's great theme, the eucatastrophe, the kind of great upheaval of the story that brings about a happy ending, a kind of catastrophic event that reverses the catastrophe into something that is a cause for thanksgiving, a eucatastrophe. I have come home at last. This is my real country. I belong here. This is Lewis, by the way. I have come home at last. This is my real country. I belong here. This is the land I have been looking for all my life, though I never knew it till now. The reason why we loved the old Narnia is that it sometimes looked a little bit like this. Come further up, come further in. And so again, this fictional myth is embodying truths in narrative form so that we can clean our windows and have a view into true reality. And the true myth that we are now being introduced to is that of the story of the Bible, of Christianity, that Revelation 21 promises that through the redemption that comes through this king, there will be a new heaven and a new earth that will be a bit like heaven and earth now, but so much greater, so much more real, so much more permanent and beautiful and good. And so the reason why we love this world is because it sometimes looks a little bit like that world. Come further up, come further in. So these stories awaken in us the great sea longing that Tolkien was describing for the elves. The good news is that the true king has come. His birth was the eucatastrophe of history, and his resurrection is the defeat of the ultimate winter. And so the invitation that we have from these guys is, are we going to allow this to show us what reality really is? And I hope that this is encouragement to you, not only to read Tolkien and Lewis, but also to let Tolkien and Lewis clean your windows and show you the true myth through their fictional myths, through their embodiment of truth, and through their stimulation of the imagination. I hope that brings something of an antidote to the kind of blight and curse of modernist disenchantment. And so if you have any questions, please do let me know in the chat. And thanks very much for joining me.
Still walking on.